Okay, guys. Good morning. I'm Kuyana. Thank you for joining us for the second keynote address of the 2021 Museums Alaska annual meeting. Welcome to all of our friends and colleagues, and welcome to our special keynote speaker, Emily Edenshaw. I'm Amy Phillips Chan, and I currently serve as board president for Museums Alaska. This morning, I am speaking from Sitnasock, which is in the town of Nome, Alaska, on the traditional homelands of the Nupiat, who, along with the St. Lawrence Island Yupik and Central Yupik communities, have been careful stewards of the Bering Strait region for generations. So after the presentation this morning, there will be an opportunity for a Q&A, which is going to be moderated by our director, Dixie Clough, who you can see up there. So please type your questions into the chat, raise your emoji hand, or turn on your mic, kind of however you feel most comfortable with joining the conversation. So now I have the great honor to introduce you to our featured speaker, Emily Edenshaw, and share a few words about her many interests and accomplishments. So Emily is originally from Monarch, Alaska, and currently makes her home in Anchorage with her husband, Devin, and their 3 sons and 2 daughters. She serves as president and CEO of the Alaska Native Heritage Center in Anchorage. And it's a celebrated living cultural center that strives to preserve and strengthen the traditions, languages, and art of Alaska's Native people. For the last several years, Emily has led cultural tourism efforts across the state. In 2020, she was named vice president of the Alaska Travel Industry Association, Arts, Cultural, and Heritage Statewide Chapter Board. Hopefully I got that right, Emily. Elected to the ATIA Board of Directors, elected to the Alaska Humanities Forum Board of Directors, and also appointed to the Anchorage Public Safety Commission. So as you can see, Emily has been extremely busy. In 2021, Emily was chosen to serve as a board for Native Americans and philanthropy. And she also helped to finalize a memorandum of understanding between the Alaska Native Heritage Center and the ATIA, which is to work collaboratively on marketing, inclusive of Alaska Native owned businesses and organizations. Emily is also currently a PhD student in Indigenous Studies at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. She holds an Executive Master of Business Administration degree in Strategic Leadership from Alaska Pacific University, and a bachelor's degree in Journalism and Public Communications from the University of Alaska Anchorage. Since graduating with her master's degree, Emily has worked for both public and private sectors, including the Central Council Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska, the First Alaskans Institute, Vice Media, the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, South Central Foundation, the Pebble Partnership, Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, and Alaska Communications. So Emily has an extremely broad experience here, my goodness. Emily joined the Alaska Native Heritage Center in November 2019, and she'd been in the leadership role just a few months before the COVID-19 pandemic reached Alaska. During a museum's leadership meeting hosted by Museums Alaska in April 2020, I recall we were kind of all scrambling with these huge operational shifts and working to secure relief and recovery funds. Emily, when she was in this meeting, was very confident that the team at ANHC could pivot to meet the needs in the community. And it really has. In August of 2020, with support from the Rasmussen Foundation and other funders, the ANHC was able to bring real-time virtual tours, events, and collections visits to schools and audiences via Zoom and Facebook Live. In addition to kind of this great lineup of virtual cooking lessons, storytelling, and art classes, the ANHC partnered with educators to produce more than 1,000 cultural kits for K through 12 students across the country, so they could kind of continue connecting with their heritage from home while we were social distancing. And in addition to educational programming, the ANHC has led health and wellness initiatives such as Operation Fish Drop in March of this year that distributed over 12,000 pounds of frozen fish to Alaska Native communities to kind of meet this need during the pandemic. Finally, the Alaska Native Heritage Center is poised to grow exponentially over the next few years. They received a couple of really nice grants awards. One is a $3 million Ford Foundation grant, which is going to be used to create and expand an intentional space of healing, and also a recent $800,000 grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to support a 3-year initiative for innovative Indigenous programming to drive social change and community healing. This also kind of helps deepen an existing relationship with the Alaska Art Alliance. So without further ado, and here to share with us this morning is Emily Edenshaw. Emily, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much, Amy, and thank you to everyone for starting your week off with me. My Yupik name is Kenegnagiagak. My English name is Emily Edenshaw, and as Amy shared, I have the honor to live and work on the Dena'ina lands as the president and CEO of the Alaska Native Heritage Center. I want to just start off by saying thank you again for Museums Alaska for inviting me to be here today. I have to admit I was a little nervous preparing for this keynote, mainly because I'm fairly new. I'd like to say I'm still fairly new in my role here at the Heritage Center. I'm learning something new every day. And so I'm extremely honored and very humbled to be able to share a little bit about what we've done here at the Heritage Center. I also want to say thank you so much to the other co-presenters and the other keynote. I've been able to log on and look at the other presentations. And so amazing job to everyone. A little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. I'm obviously going to touch on the Heritage Center and our work. I'm also going to really be sharing some common themes that if there are a few takeaway messages, it's not only about transforming the institution in which you work within, but also linking arms and finding ways to help transform sectors and industries and just really leaning into your power as an organization. I also want to just share that everything that I'm sharing with you all today is, knowledge and teachings that I've learned from my community, and something that was not shared in my bio. And this is something that I share with a lot of people. I was not raised in my community of Emonic. My mother was part of a forced adoption, and which is pretty common during that time. And so really my entire adult life, I moved back to Alaska when I was 18, and I have been so dedicated to immersing myself and learning more about who I am and where I come from and my roots. And I'm really proud to share with everyone, I was able to go to my home community of Emonic and meet my biological family in 2017. That's something that I've for a really long time, and it impacted my identity as a Native woman. Like in every community, there's lateral oppression that exists. But what we say here at the Heritage Center is that, no matter where you are as a Native person, welcome home. We need you, we want you. And especially with out-migration that's occurring across our state, we as Native organizations need to find ways to meeting our community where they're at, whether if it's in, rural Alaska, urban Alaska, in the lower 48, or even in jails or on the streets. And you're going to see some of that approach in my presentation today. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, make sure I'm doing this correctly. Can you see it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wonderful, thank you. So this is a pretty iconic shot. I'm not going to assume that everyone on the line has been to the Heritage Center, but this shot, this photo was taken right in front of our Inupiaq house around Lake Tiulana. It's named after one of our elders, Paul Tiulana. And so I'm going to touch on a little bit about our facility in this presentation, but as I shared in my introduction, we do rest on the traditional homelands of the Dena'ina people, and I want to start off by just saying thank you so much to to the Dena'ina people. We would not be where we're at today if it wasn't for your ongoing stewardship that runs thousands of years deep. And I would just encourage everyone who is on the line today to really understand the traditional homelands in which you work or reside on. That's actually something else that, me being a visitor and guest on these lands, I have a responsibility to learn the history of the Dena'ina people. And that's something that I'm doing right now. So I would just really, again, encourage you to figure out the traditional homelands. And based off some of the comments that I read in the chat, many of you do know your traditional homelands, which is really awesome to see. So here is just a map. Again, I don't want to assume that everyone has been to the Heritage Center. If you haven't, I personally invite you to attend. So we sit on 26 acres. Our main building, which is right down here, if you could see my mouse, this is about 36,000 square feet. And we have 6 traditional sites that are around our lake. When Amy had mentioned using some of our Ford money to really help foster healing, we're looking at this area right next to our southeast house to turn it into a healing garden. That's something that we're going to be working with our cultural advisory committees on, that I'm going to talk a little bit about later. But I wanted to share a map just so you all can kind of get a sense of who and what I'm talking about. So who we are, as Amy shared, our mission, our vision is thriving Alaska Native people are respected and valued, and our cultures are respected and valued. What we often share here at the Heritage Center is that we are the only statewide living cultural center in Alaska dedicated to preserving and celebrating all cultures and all traditions. So although we rest on the traditional homelands of the Dena'ina people, we're doing work all across our state. Something that is really a source of inspiration and strength for me is the fact that we're really intentional in saying we are a living cultural center. We are dedicated to bringing our cultures from behind the museum glass. And for many of you who have worked in this sector a lot longer than me, or if you are Alaska Native who are on the call today, I'm sure many of you would agree that there is this ongoing stereotype that you could only find Alaska Native peoples and our cultures and our traditions in museums. And what we often say here is that, we are bringing our cultures from behind the museum glass so people can experience them, they can see them, they can smell them, they can hear them. And so again, it's a source of inspiration and strength for me. So a little bit about what we do and how we do it. As a Yupik woman, one of my values is to live in truth. And so just to completely be honest with you all, here at the Heritage Center, what we often say here, if you are working with Indigenous communities and you are not, even if you are Native, one thing we often say is that, you should take a cultural awareness workshop. This is really a time where you get to spend with culture bearers, language warriors, people who are really excited about sharing their knowledge with you. And something we often, we've been taught here at the Heritage Center is that if you do not have Indigenous voices at the center of your work, it's really going to be hard for your work to be authentic. And what I mean by that is when you're really looking at exhibits and programming, something I often tell myself is, don't have a conversation without us, about us without us. And I'm sharing that just, as, not a pro tip, but just learn from our mistakes. And this is something at the Heritage Center, again, as, just, in the spirit of being truthful and honesty and just really encouraging, if you're working within this sector, it's worth taking a cultural awareness workshop so you can understand and really have the knowledge of how to work with Indigenous communities. And there's so many different organizations all across the state that are doing that. We also do school visits. I'm sure many of your organizations do school visits. And so I wanted to include that. In terms of youth development, you really can't tell or talk about the history of the Heritage Center without talking about our internship. In fact, some of our first employees were our interns, 2 of which are still here with us today. As Amy mentioned, we're doing a lot of work with community wellness and suicide prevention. That's also through the lens of decolonizing. One example that I share with people is when I was going to UAA, I actually had a student or a fellow student who had multiple suicides within our village. And a lot of the policies and procedures at UAA, and this is not to vilify them, but this is just one example of it's written in a very Western framework and lens. And so how can we partner with institutions to help decolonize and to really integrate Indigenous knowledge? While we're also working with cultural advisory committees as well as councils. We're also doing a lot of museum sovereignty work. And I want to say the academic in me, this is like where I geek out and I love, when we talk about working with, people within, culture bears and people who've been doing this work a lot longer than me is something that it's really also grounded in healing. I want to lift up Nadia from the Siri Foundation. She's been doing excellent work with museum sovereignty. Also Kevin Tripp, we are currently doing a lot of work with trying to figure out, hopefully it gets funded through NSF, developing Indigenous protocols with archives and collections. And so I just wanted to briefly share a couple examples, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more in depth about some other items in my presentation. But how we do our work, like many of your organizations, we do have a board. We also have committees. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But the reason why I wanted to share this is that we do have a statewide board. And so again, although we rest on the Dena'ina land, we have a board of directors from all over the state. And the other thing, kind of in line with cultural awareness workshops, really encouraging everyone to take a CAW. And again, like full disclosure, I'm not trying to promote the Heritage Center. There are many other organizations that do CAWs, but also really find ways to work with cultural advisory committees. If you work at your organization and if you don't have an elders council or a traditional knowledge council, this is something that I know for me, it's been a life raft for me. It's a way that we can, I could kind of check in with them. I can get ideas from them. They also give us guidance, and I'll give some examples here in a little while. But the last point, working with elders and culture bearers and contractors, the one thing that I would add on here is not only work with them, but pay them. This is something that I've heard a lot of feedback from our community about is making sure that when we bring in our knowledge bearers and our culture bearers, make sure that we give them a good honorarium. And as a PhD student, I'll just say that there are so many people within our community, the Native community, that have more than equivalent, if not more, with PhD status in terms of their knowledge. And just I would really, really encourage you, make sure that you're not only working with our community, but making sure that you're paying them. But again, I wanted to share, this is what we're doing at the Heritage Center, and we're having these conversations right now. And so the Heritage Center is in that same boat. And so just wanted to share that. So I'm a data girl. I want to say that's one of my love languages. And so I wanted to also share that, data tells a story. And this is something that if you're looking at your financials or if you're looking at, trends, I would really encourage everyone, really take a step back and see the story that it's telling. But, here at the Heritage Center, like I said, we sit on 26 acres. We opened our doors in 1989. We've worked with more than 1 million people. Pre-COVID, we worked with more than 50,000 tourists a year. And I want to just share, when I get to the COVID section, there was no kind of data that was available to what we were to experience this last summer. The two things that I want to close on this slide is we have about 20 full-time staff. We have double that in grants. And I'm sure many of you would can probably relate in that reality. And something that we've often said here at the Heritage Center is that we do not want to project project ourselves to death. And so we are being really strategic in the funding that we're going after. We're also doing a lot of work in diversifying our funds, which is really synonymous with creating more social enterprises. And so I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. But again, just being really intentional, not to just go after all the funds that are available, because I'm sure many of you would agree, some money is just too expensive. So this is this slide. I know there's a lot, but I wanted to share it with everyone because I think oftentimes the Heritage Center is just distilled down to, oh, you're just a museum. Oh, you're just here for the tourists. Oh, you're just doing this. And when I stepped into my role here, and this is something, just working with the staff here, we all kind of took a step back and said, like, wait a minute, whose narrative are we inheriting? We are an Alaska Native nonprofit organization, and just being able to really tap into the self-determined, we get to write that story. We get to write who and what, the work that we're doing, who we get to work with. But in the value of seeing things that, all things are related, I wanted to share the slide because we are doing work across systems, across populations, across governments, across generations. And so when we talk about not only transforming and really taking that internal look, understanding that we also are interrelated and interconnected with not only industries, but sectors and groups. And so I would really encourage everyone on the line today, spend, an hour just really trying to figure out what's the ecosystem in which your organization operates. And, I want to just full disclosure, I'm sure there are many other items that are on here that aren't on here that we're a part of, but that just allows you to really figure out, how are we integrating or really getting our work out of the, not only within the Native community, but really trying to find ways to help change systems and industries and sectors and whatnot. So we do have some operating truths and principles here at the Heritage Center. I'm not going to go over every one of them, but the one I really want to hone in on is, our greatest form of strength, what we say here at the Heritage Center, is our culture. It is medicine. And as I shared in my presentation, or excuse me, my introduction, we really are trying to meet our community where they're at. We have a truth here that we say, everyone, no matter where you live, should have access to your culture, and it should be free. And yes, we know that we do have overhead, we do have administrative costs to cover, but we are trying to find ways to really partner in meaningful ways to ensure that we're meeting our community where they're at. But then also being intentional that we are going to ground our programming and our work through our way of life, our knowledge system, versus looping it in on the back end. And so again, if you're wanting to do an exhibit, or if you're wanting to develop any sort of programming, just work with a CAC and Cultural Advisory Committee to really ensure that the exhibit is really grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing and protocols. And again, we're doing that here at the Heritage Center. And so you do not have to reinvent the wheel. Know that we're a resource, and I'd be happy to share any sort of documents with you. But again, we're doing that here at the Heritage Center. And I wanted to share a quick video here. Let me stop sharing. Can you see it or no?
No.
Okay, let me stop sharing and then I'll share my screen again. I wanted to share this video because, again, this really does go back to the kind of narrative of we're just here for, as a museum, or we're just here for tourists.
Shishida Shi'iji Tatiana Tiknor Ishlanchi. Dinaina Slinket Degatan Ishlanchida. Dugatnu Shugusha Kaya Klan. This is me. This is who I am. I am Tatiana Tiknor. I am Dinaina, Tlingit, and Degaton, and I was born and raised in Anchorage. I started coming to the Alaska Native Heritage Center as a baby. My mom worked here. In a way, I was raised here, surrounded by culture bearers. This is where I started to dance and learn about other cultures besides my own. Dance has taught me to have respect for all cultures and to create a positive space to share positive energy when I dance for myself and others. Now I have my own little family. These dances and values I have learned here, I am passing down to my son. He has picked up the drum and felt the heartbeat it carries. His feet have understood the movements of our dances. And I know one day he will be a culture bearer of his people. One day he will be a future leader.
That gets me every time. He's so cute. Little sage. Let me share my screen one more time. So I wanted to share that video just so you can see that, again, we often just get distilled down to we're just as a museum, or we're just here as a museum, or just here for tourists. But when you peel those layers back off, we're doing such great work within and throughout our community through the lens of programming. COVID-19. And so like many of you and your organizations, we were heavily impacted by COVID. Something that a lot of people don't know is that we did close our doors for about 3 weeks. And we worked remotely. And then after that 3 week, and this was back in 2020, we came back to the Heritage Center. And the reason why we came back, it was really through the lens of, when we were formed in 1989, we were formed as a place of healing and a place of community for our people. And so what other, there's really no other better place in Anchorage, sitting on, the lands that we sit on. We knew that we had to act fast and to really in line with the original vision of the Heritage Center. If our community needs healing, it's now. And that's where we really had that internal conversation of, we really need to step up and we need to find ways to pivot. I know that was the word for 2020, but really find ways to meet our community where they're at. But from a fiduciary standpoint, we lost over $1 million, also impacted facility sales, as well as our cultural awareness workshops. And our visitor rate was down 96%. And I'll just say, when we were doing the numbers, I was hanging on to that 4%. But we did have to, in addition to that, we did have to curtail our programming and our employee layoffs. I'm really proud to share we've been able to bring people back. And so one of the things that I want to share with everyone, when COVID started unfolding in Anchorage and really in Alaska, we did take that time to kind of press pause. And the one thing that a lot of people don't know is that we use this time to bring everybody together in a safe way, wearing masks, and we brought everyone together in on our facility. We brought together we had meetings with our board of directors, with our staff, with elders, as well as our interns. And we all had this really, very honest conversation of, okay, we know that we need to manage. And if we manage, our philosophy is if there is a safe way to do it, we are going to do it. And we're going to really commit to innovation and resiliency with the mindset of we are determined to come out of this stronger than ever before. But on the other side of that coin is that really working through it with our interns, you know, there was this assumption that it was okay before pre-COVID. And what I mean by that is there was a lot of feedback from our youth interns, and they're like, you know, we actually like not having visitors here, because for many, many years, we felt like we came second to tourists. And I'll just completely, you know, being real with everyone, that was like a stake in my heart. Like, I was completely heartbroken when I heard that feedback from our youth, that they felt like they were coming second to tourists. And so it was really that hard conversation that we needed to have internally, holding that mirror up to ourselves to say, you know what? Our goal should not be to go back to what was before COVID. Our goal is to make sure that we never go back to, you know, what happened or the realities before COVID. And we've been able to do that. And again, it's just being that transparent with everyone that, you know, it wasn't, you know, working for everyone, including our interns pre-COVID. One of the other kind of themes that we really talked about here at the Heritage Center is that we were not going to let this crisis go to waste. And like I shared, we immediately convened board meetings. And another thing that interns said, they want to be involved in staff meetings. For 20 years, 21 years, they had been employees here, but they were never involved in staff meetings or even our strategic planning meetings. And for me, when I heard that, I was just like, oh my gosh, you know, these are the future leaders that we're trying to develop and ensure that they're going to be the leaders of our next generation. And we're not even including them as part of our strategic planning process. Like, that needs to change. And we did that. In addition to engaging, you know, really all of our staff, we also, as Amy mentioned, like, we went out and we actively ramped up our, you know, we applied for grants, but we also used this time to sign strategic MOUs. And as Amy mentioned, we did sign one with the Alaska Tourism Industry Association. And a strategic MOU is just really grounded in, you know, we know that we're going to have a strong working relationship with other industries. It's really putting that onto paper. And it's the first of its kind with the State Tourism Association, but it's that one step in that, you know, positive direction. I would encourage your organizations, your museums, you know, if you're working with visitor bureaus, you know, boroughs, municipalities, really put what you want into a strategic MOU. And again, I have the template for it. Feel free to amend it if you'd like it. Just let me know. Another example of us really using this opportunity is to join forces with organizations. We were heavily impacted, but there were other organizations like Alaska Art Alliance that if we did not do something, they would have had to close their doors for good. And if any of you have ever been to Anchorage, there is, and I'll just say it, you know, there is this stereotype of, you know, all the homeless people in Anchorage are Alaska Native, or, you know, we even get our interns here from tourists, you know, how come how come all of these Native people are on the street, you know, and I'm kind of like, sanitizing that. They ask really inappropriate questions to our interns. But this was something, you know, what Alaska Art Alliance is doing is we are working with an organization that is grounding their programming in arts and culture. And we're working with 20 Alaska Native men who struggle with homelessness. And I have another video that I want to share with you here. And so it really is inspiring. And if we did not act as soon as we did, and this is in part to the Mellon Foundation, Alaska Art Alliance would have had to close their doors. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hold on, because I do want you to see this video. It is, hold on one second, sorry. Why is this not going? Okay.
I think you might have to unshare and then share again.
Okay, let me see. Hold on. Operator error, my bad, my apologies. Give me 1 second.
You have about 3 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Well, I will just share this out. I'll share my let me share my screen. I'll share this out and you can click on that video. It's a beautifully done video by Alexis Salee. Can you see the rest of my presentation here?
Yep.
Okay, so out in response to COVID, some of the other things that we've done, we've really looked at using this opportunity. Like I shared, we have a 36,000 square foot facility. We've never had an energy plan. And when we were looking at our money going out, we were spending about $250,000 every year on energy. And so we partnered with ANTHC to develop an energy plan that comes with recommendations, everything from like windows to, HVAC systems, which is in my, whole nother language for me. But we're also using this opportunity. Our holocultures is a 21-year-old exhibit. And so we really are trying to use our Ford Foundation money to do a complete overhaul of our holocultures with the intent of really not only using technology in a really exciting way to help foster those cultural connections, but also finding ways to do truth-telling exhibits, whether if it's through the boarding school era or internment camps, but really finding ways to help. It's grounded in the lens of healing. Let's see. Okay, so stronger emphasis on our internship program. I've already talked about that, but this is just an example. We brought our interns back during COVID, and again through the lens of if we're managing to open up safely, it was really through that concept. We also use this time to really ramp up our communications, and so those are just some examples of all of our communications. And this is something I really want to lift up Presley West, who's our communications manager. Just a little plug, please like us on Facebook and Instagram. We're also looking at doing TikTok now. But this is just an example of our social media outreach. And as Amy mentioned, we've been delivering culture boxes. And so we've been able, even since then, we've hired a culture box coordinator and we're mailing out our culture boxes all over the state. Please reach out to us if you'd like us to curate a box. It's very region specific and age specific. And this is really in part to the Siri Foundation. So thank you, Susan Anderson. So as I mentioned earlier, we work with our board, and again, that theme of, I don't want to make, send the message that everything was great before COVID, because as an organization, I want to say that we should always kind of be in the mentality that there is always room for improvement. And this last year during, it was in June 2021, we had youth come forward. And I would just like to say that, I'm from a generation where pronouns and just, I feel like I'm a student and on so many fronts. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because we had youth who came forward and said, it was really, a message of we want to see action. And when we talk about working with LGBTQ youth, two-spirited youth, this was something that I would say, like in a broad brushstroke, like, we've done our pride posts, we've hosted events here. But the reason why I'm sharing this is because it was really out of a crisis of us wanting to really put action behind the words of we are a place of safe haven for all aspects of Native identity. And what I mean by that is that, we had youth who really came forward. They were struggling not only with their identity, but what we came together and we said, what, we really need to put action behind, we are a safe place for all aspects of identity. And we did that. We hosted an LGBTQ two-spirited event here. And I'll just say that was probably the most stressful time in my life. We received death threats for hosting the event that we hosted here. There was a lot of misinformation that was in the media about that one event. There was a lot of misinformation just spread about what the event was. But out of that came a DEI committee. And the reason why I wanted to share this with everyone is because this is one example of us using, yes, COVID kind of pushed us to do innovative, really important programming. But when we think of the long-term approach and really putting our Native values of diversity, love, and inclusion into action, this is one example that I want to share with everyone. And yes, although we're still in COVID, this is at the board level. This is the board saying, if we do not form a committee to where we are making sure that we're informed and we are doing something about these struggles, whether if it's suicide prevention, whether if it's Black Lives Matter, whether if it's LGBTQ rights, it's really the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee is grounded in the understanding that if we do not do something about these issues, we are not going to have a next generation to pass our traditions on to. And again, kind of going back to that perception of like, you're just a museum. Don't get in, you need to stay in your lane and don't take on these other social issues. But what our board has said is, again, if we do not tackle these issues head on, we aren't going to have a next generation to pass our traditions and our languages on to. And so I wanted to share that with everyone. And again, it was one of my most challenging times in my life, but I really want to lift up my staff, and a lot of good did come out of it. And then finally, and I know I just have to breeze through this, as I shared earlier on that ecosystem slide, we really are trying to use our programming in a way, our relationships, tapping into that, getting onto boards, getting onto commissions, and just saying, you know what, we are going to help transform an industry that we are a part of. As museums, we're often looped into the tourism industry and the education sector and industry. And so the one thing I want to share with everyone on this slide is that, when we talk about cultural tourism, there is so much research that's available, that's out there today. And there's a lot of data on here, but the one thing I want to make sure that everyone knows is that when people experience cultural tourism, they stay longer and they spend more money. And so why wouldn't you want to partner with Native institutions, culture bearers, whether if it's SHI, the Inupiaq Heritage Center, the Heritage Center here in Anchorage, we are here. And not only is it the right thing to do, it's good for business. And cultural tourism is a whole nother presentation that I'm happy to touch on. We're doing a lot of work here at the Heritage Center. When we talk about the definition of cultural tourism, I think oftentimes people scratch their head and they're like, well, what does it mean? And what we often say here at the Heritage Center is that it means different things to different people. It's not going to just be a museum. It's not just going to be a cultural center. It's not just going to be an artist, but really at the heart of it, it's a way for us to preserve our way of life while also sharing our cultures and our traditions with visitors. And something we often say here as well is that, economists can measure all day number of cruise ships and number of passengers, but what they can't measure is the immeasurable, which is our youth knowing their language and having that confidence and knowing who they are and their identity. And so I do want to just end with on this slide, for the first time in our state's history, we now have a line item for cultural tourism. We have $100,000 for cultural tourism marketing. That is history being made right now. And that's in part to the work of Camille Ferguson and many others. This is an example of, again, we're just distilled down to museum, but we are transforming industries. And this is really geared and through the lens of, we don't want our visitors just to have a geographical experience. Alaska always has been and always will be a Native place. This is not a non-Native place. We have our native people have been here for thousands and thousands, in some places 14,000 years. You are in a native place. When visitors come here, they come to a native place. Cultural tourism needs to have the funding and the equity of support that other industries have. And that's what we're doing here at the Heritage Center. And just so save the dates. If you want to find ways to learn more about cultural tourism, I wanted to share these resources with you. And these are just my lasting thoughts. Again, ask yourself, as leaders of museums, cultural centers, what narratives are we inheriting about ourselves? We asked ourselves that, and we just said, you know what? We need to put that narrative down. Or even, you could change that out with, if there's inherited conflict, if you haven't worked with another organization before, that's not yours to carry. Put it down. Also understand that you have the power to not only transform and make an impact in the next generation, but also, again, you have your organization, your museum can really make a change within sectors and industries. The Heritage Center is doing that right now. And I know, working with people like Harriet and other incredible leaders, we're doing that right now. As I shared earlier, failure can be our biggest teacher. Hearing from our interns that they came second, that was a fail. That was a huge fail on our part. And you know what? We never want to go back to that ever again. As I shared it earlier, remember, don't have a conversation about us without us. Always work with cultural advisory committees. And, the last thing I'll just share is that understand that we're still in COVID, but there is, especially in the example of diversity, equity, inclusion, there is always room for improvement. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I apologize if I went over, and I'm going to stop sharing. I was trying to breeze through that. My apologies.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was wonderful. And Dixie, do we have a couple minutes for questions?
We do have a couple minutes for questions. I think we can go to about 9:55, and then I'll have to start the admin roundtable after that. But we do have a question about where you got the information about cultural tourists, like the numbers.
Yeah, I see that in the comment box. So that's actually, if you reach out to the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association, so IANTA, they do national research, and that came directly from IANTA. And so IANTA has been doing a lot of work with policy. And so I actually recently did a presentation with Camille Ferguson at AMBCA. And if your institution or your museum, there is a law called the Native Act, and I'm happy to send those slides out as well. But basically, and the reason why I'm sharing this is that IANTA, if you're not a part of IANTA, you should join. It's a great way to really not only have access to national research, but also have access to funding through the lens of cultural tourism. And so just know, like I said, IANTA is the organization that has led that research.
Looks like we have a few people who would like to see your MOU. So would it be possible for you to share it with me, and I can put it on the Whova on your page? Okay, wonderful. Yeah. We'll do that. Does anyone else have any questions?
I have a question, Emily. This is Angelique Grantham. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. I'm thinking about cultural tourism and the ways that museums are part of the cultural tourism sector, but potentially separate from the cultural tourism sector. What are some ways that you think that we could be, better meet your definition of the cultural tourism sector as being places that perpetuate Alaska Native culture instead of just share it really behind glass?
So I would say that, through the lens of programming and finding ways to not only have, well, actually, let me make sure I'm understanding your question. Can you repeat that? Because I want to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly.
Well, it just seems that in your definition, you said, cultural tourism is about sharing Alaska Native cultures, but then also focusing on the perpetuation of those cultures. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, what ways do you think museums can be better at doing that?
Yeah, so I guess, I could speak from the example here at the Heritage Center. We've done, obviously we have our programming, our summer programming where we have, our live programming where people can come and take tours and see dancers. We also have artists that are within the Hall of Cultures. But I would say that another example of that is really bringing our cultures from behind the museum glass. An example that I'll share, this is actually just recent and we haven't even done a press release about it. We actually had a robe that came back to us. It's like from the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's a teaching robe. And we are working with ANSEP right now on hoping, hopefully coming up with, my husband's from Southeast, I'm not from Southeast and I'm not a weaver, but I want to share with you. And the reason why I want to share this example is because it's one example of how we are partnering with other organizations to really come up with engineer some sort of, whether if it's like some sort of like a holder or some way for people to really study robes and to preserve it at the same time, where we could flip it on its front and back. So when you're learning how to weave, you not only study the front, but you also study the back. And so I think that you can do it in many different ways, not only through programming, through teaching and education, through artist classes. What we've also done here is through our gift shop. And as I shared earlier, like through social enterprise, if you've come to the Heritage Center, we recently brought our gift shop in-house. And that is, if you look at that video that I wasn't able to share, that's one example of how we are partnering with other organizations like Alaska Art Alliance. It's really that social cultural backbone of, it's not just a gift shop. It's a way for us to help, transition people off of the streets. And so a lot of our artwork that's in our gift shop are from men who struggle with homelessness. And I'm really proud to share with everyone that we recently got a grant to create a women's version program of that called Inupiphany. And so we're going to be working with Alaska Native women who struggle with homelessness as a way to create art, but then also sell it in our gift shop. And so I hope that answers your question. So regarding cultural tourism, I would just say that if your organization, whether if it's like owned by the city or if it's, your board is predominantly non-native, I would say that still join our working group. We meet quarterly. It's led by myself and Alyssa Rodriguez. And we're actually born out of Ayanta. And I want to say, I know Selena's has and some other people have been as part of that work group. But if internally, I would say that not only come up with either a statement at the board level, but maybe even have your own cultural tourism advisory group within your organization, kind of that framework of a CAC. But figure out how you do that, through the lens of a cultural advisory group or a cultural tourism work group or a committee. But then I would also say another way for you to do that is to sign a strategic MOU. And just like I said, keep in line, keep an eye out for IANTA and ATIA and the conference that's coming up. I hope that helps.
Okay, it looks like we have time for one more question. And here, Brennan has one. Is it okay to reach out to you or someone else at ANHC for information about partnering and developing cultural programming?
Yeah, absolutely. Just reach out to me. I'm happy to, I'm happy to get you in contact with any of my staff here. And this is something, like I've shared with my team here, just because we've never done it before doesn't mean that we can't do it. And I would just say in light of COVID, let's try to find ways to partner in new ways, and we're stronger together. And so absolutely reach out to me. And it's a really exciting time here at the Heritage Center. So yes, absolutely reach out to me.
Awesome. I think that's it for questions. I do have to, unfortunately, end this Zoom and start another one, but I loved your presentation. Thank you so much. I learned so much.
Thank you.
Yes. I can't wait to visit.
Thank you, Emily. And
Yep.
I was going to say thanks again to Emily, and you shared so many wonderful resources. And maybe for people who are on this morning, the Alaska Native Heritage Center website has a lot of those available, the links and the videos that you were sharing. So that's a great place to check out some of those materials. Yeah.
Thank
Emily,
you.
this was wonderful. Thank you so much for taking time and sharing with us. And it's great. Wish you the best for the rest of 2021. You have so many projects on your plate. Oh my goodness.
It's all good work. It's good work. It's so nice to see you, Selena. Thank you. Hi, Harriet. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Always reach out.
Bye, Emily. Thank
Take care,
you.
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.